Hi, and we're here with the December Comics Experience Kids Club graphic novel of the month club meeting. Graphic novel of the month club meeting for Lucy and Andy Neanderthal. We have Jeffrey Brown here with us, live and in person, and of course I'm Brian Hibbs, your host, with our co-host Ben.
Hello.
Hello. And hi. So we're here. Great book.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys liked it, right?
Yeah.
Everybody loved the book?
Yeah.
Lots of laughs and joy. Okay, good, awesome. Let me start my questions, perhaps, with what got you into comics? Why comics?
Why? I mean, what else is there?
Yeah.
No, I grew up like my parents are big book people. Like our house is filled with books. We would go to the bookstore. I mean, in my memory, it seems like every other day, but it's probably not quite so often. And every time we would go, my parents would usually say like, okay, if you guys want to pick out a book, you can pick out a book. So I always loved reading, and I loved, picture books, and I always loved drawing, and I would read the Sunday comics. I would copy Garfield and draw my own little Garfield comics. And then I also loved like comic books. So I would, the grocery store in Michigan where I grew up, it's called Meijer, and they would have their little comic spinner rack, and I would buy comics there. And then I discovered this comic shop near my house called Collector's Corner. And then it happened that on the way home from school, the bus stopped right outside that comic shop, and then the next stop was my house. So I would always get off a stop early and then go to the comic shop and then walk home from school. And so I just always loved reading comics, and then I would just be drawing my own comics. And I always thought, like, when I grow up, I'm gonna draw for Marvel Comics. I'm gonna be a comic book artist. And eventually, I started to grow up, like at least technically, if not mentally. And in high school and college, I started kind of turning toward fine art and thought, I'm going to be a painter. I'm going to paint. I'm going to do paintings. They're going to be in museums and art galleries, like capital A art. And so in 2000, I moved to Chicago to go to the School of the Art Institute for my MFA, my Master of Fine Arts. And I was there painting, and, it just, like, I was painting, and there were nice enough paintings and like easy enough to look at. Right. And the faculty is all kind of looking at them like, something's missing. Something's not quite there. But at the same time I'm doing these paintings, I was still filling sketchbooks with all these cartoony drawings, little comics and lots of text and image and really cartoony drawings. And sometimes the faculty would see those things and they're like, well, these are really interesting. These are really great. And so things were kind of percolating that, like, painting is maybe not where I'm expressing myself the way I want to, but people are responding to these drawings. And then I'd gotten back into reading comics. Because at the same time, I'd kind of switched to making like a different kind of art. I'd stopped reading comics so much, but right before I moved to Chicago, rediscovered Dan Clowes, the David Boring storyline had just come out, and then Chris Ware's Acme Novelty Library, and all, so I got really into reading like all the alternative comics that were out, like Chester Brown and James Kachalka. I'd always liked Julie Doucet, but went and recollected all of her comics. Right. And Chris and Dan were on tour for their books, and were coming through Chicago, and had a chance to meet them and talk to them, and at a couple signings. And Chris was really supportive, and I brought a sketchbook with me, and he looked at stuff, and like he actually picked out this little moment where he's just flipping through, and he like read something and he laughed, and it was this little newspaper comic strip style, but it was an autobiographical. And it's actually one of the pages that I redrew in Clumsy.
Mm-hmm.
Just this little autobiographical moment, and something about him, like the way he responded to that, and knowing that these paintings weren't working the same way. I was like, you know what? Like, why not express myself through comics?
Yeah.
Like, why not draw comics if that's really what I like, the kind of art I can make that communicates what I want to communicate, and then people get it.
Yeah.
And so Clumsy was my first book. It's autobiographical relationship story, and ever since then I was just like, yeah, comics is what I should be doing, which I knew when I was a kid.
Sure.
Forgot somewhere.
You tend to forget in the middle there. Were you, so when you started doing Clumsy, were you still in the MFA program, or?
Yeah, so it was actually after my first year, I had, like, at the end of my first year, I had this really horrible critique, whereas, and I actually wrote about this in another autobiographical book, Funny Misshapen Body. You can, if you want to get the whole story, but basically I had this really awful critique where they're like, yeah, you're not going to make it as an artist. Like, you should really look into something else. And so Clumsy was like, you know what? When I was a kid making comics, art was fun, and I just want to make something fun. And also at art school, like there's so much pressure to like explain your art and talk about concepts, and like, you know, other people were making work that like, it was like art about art that was about art that was about art. Like, it was like, just it's not about real life. So I was like, I'm going to make the most autobiographical, down to earth, intimate, personal thing that's like as far away from that as I can do. So it was like those two concepts. And I just drew Clumsy like that summer between semesters. And then when I came back, I was working on my second autobiographical book, Unlikely. And it was kind of such a different response from the faculty, because like they're kind of like, we don't really know what to say, because it's like we don't really understand comics, so we don't really know how to give any feedback on this.
Right.
But it seems like you have your thing now.
Right. Was there any difference in reaction because you were now suddenly a published artist?
Well, at the time, I self-published Clumsy at the end of when I was graduating, and so there were, and it also is like, it's interesting because now I teach at the School of the Art Institute. I teach a comics class. They have other people teaching there. And there's such a different reaction to it. Chris Ware actually was a visiting professor or something last year. And so the reaction now is like so different. Whereas back then there was just kind of like, okay, here's this weird guy, like, I don't know what he's gonna go off and do some comics, I guess. So
it's amazing how much it has changed in such a generally small amount of time. I mean, we're talking 15, 16 years,
right?
And the way that the perception in schools and in academia is about comics is completely different.
Yeah, and I mean, and part of that too is that there's such a different kind of material available, like especially the last few years when there's more available for younger readers again, and there's mature work for adults to read, and there's such a wide range of kinds of comics and subjects, and so whatever your interest and your reading level, and you know, it's easier to take more seriously because people understand that it's not like comics isn't just one thing. It's just a medium for different messages.
Right.
So,
yeah. It's not just a genre.
Right.
A lot of people used to think comics were just a genre.
Yeah.
And it's a medium. Well, so it's interesting because you started off doing Clumsy and Unlikely, books like this, which I think if you kids read these, you'd probably be like, this is just people talking and kissing and wanting to kiss and not being able to kiss.
Wait another 7 years.
All of you parents, however, will love all of his autobiographical comics. I mean, you really will. But then you started moving into kids comics, which is, I can't think of another cartoonist who has made that kind of a move to go from adult comics to kids comics. So what prompted that?
Well, I mean, it wasn't it was never a decision. It was just kind of just happened so naturally. So it basically started with Darth Vader and Son, the first Star Wars book I did, where the concept of that was basically like, here's Darth Vader, and he has to raise Luke as a 4-year-old, and it was kind of based on my son, who was 4 at the time, and kind of looking at parenting through this lens. And I thought, here's a book for people like me who grew up as kids with Star Wars and then now are having kids. But kids loved it. Like kids, in fact, so like Chronicle, the publisher, went from promoting it as like this adult humor book, and now it's like a kids book, because like that's all, like kids were responding to it, like kids magazines, like like everyone was kind of like looking at it this different way. And but it was never explicitly written as like a kids book. It's just, I wrote it like, I didn't want to make it too adult, but I wrote it for adults. And that led to Jedi Academy. What happened was Scholastic wanted to do a middle school Star Wars series. And so they went to Lucasfilm and they're like, we want to do a heavily illustrated, maybe something kind of like Diary of the Wimpy Kid with Star Wars. And my editor on the Darth Vader series at Lucasfilm, J.W. Rinsler, recommended me to Scholastic. So Scholastic got in touch with me, and I was like, well, I've got nothing else particularly busy going on right now. So yeah, I can try and write a middle grade Star Wars book too. And then I just found, it's really, again, like even Jedi Academy, I really didn't write necessarily like this is for kids. I just, it's writing about a period of time when I was younger, but a lot of it is written the same way I write my autobiographical books, which is just drawing on my own personal feelings and experiences from life. And then I just had my editor like would pull me back and sometimes and be like, like this section, like that's maybe a concept that kids aren't going to be as interested in or might not get the same way that adults maybe, or, like this language is a little too obtuse for younger readers. So.
Obtuse, right? That you guys, that word's a little too obtuse for you guys.
Obtuse is a little too obtuse.
I think Ben had a question.
So do you see yourself doing any other like known series with sort of a younger feel to it?
Well, like younger than what Jedi Academy and Luciani are for, or like just continuing?
The same age group in mind, but
definitely. Yeah. So with Luciani, like, so you've read the first book. This is actually the advanced reader copy of book 2, which will come out this fall. And I'm actually working on book 3. So here's the first draft of book 3.
Nice.
So later you can come up and look at those when I'm signing. But so, and then after that series is done, I have a science fiction series of my own that I'm gonna start. That I think the simplest way to describe it is maybe Star Trek for kids.
Okay.
But like another same middle grade age range, and but kind of science fiction, but my own thing instead of Star Wars. So.
And do you see yourself going back to adult comics?
Right now, I don't have. There's only one more adult comic that I have in mind that, which would be kind of about process, so about how I make comics, and I'd mix in stories about going to comic conventions and goofy things that happen or stupid stuff I do. But it's one I've collected notes for, but I'm not anywhere near ready to start working on it. And but I could see myself doing more adult stuff. And I do have a project that's not comics, that's more adult oriented. That we'll see if it doesn't happen, or if it does happen, then I'll talk more about it. But right now it's kind of like, there's no point. We'll just put those things like it. Remember 3 years ago, he was talking about that thing and here it is, or we never saw it. So.
Yeah. I just love that you made the transition from being like one of the main kind of autobio guys to doing kids comics, and it's so seamless. Jeffrey did a comic called The Change Bots, which is basically his version of Transformers. And I think it's really the precursor to some of this
you know,
stuff.
And that's another one too, where I wrote it for adults, but I wrote it in a way that like I was like I wanted to write it for adults, but that kids could still read it, and they might not. In the same way, like I guess the classic example is Looney Tunes, where there's jokes that, like when you get older, then all of a sudden like jokes take on different layers of meaning. So I kind of tried to write it that way, where if there's goofy, funny stuff that kids will get the joke, but then if you're older and you grew up with those cartoons, you'll get the jokes in a different way, and then there's other like layers of meaning kind of thrown in here and there. And I think, you know, really for my strategy my way of writing for kids kind of follows that. Like I don't think you necessarily need to like write down to kids. No. And I think, you know, it's something like with my kids, it's like the books that I choose to read. I have my older son is 10 now, and I have a 3-year-old, and with both of them, it's, you know, I want to read stuff with them that I can enjoy at the same time that I'm reading with them. And so I never try to I always try to write for myself in a way, and then just let the editors like kind of soften things where it needs to be, or, you know, if I can't talk about this in a certain way, or, you know, how to be careful so that that it's not going to be confusing.
Yeah. No, I think most of the best kids stuff works for adults too, you know. I mean, my favorite movie of all time is probably Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Right. You know, I mean, what an amazing film that is. You know, it's totally different film when you see it as an adult, guys. I'm just telling you. What was it like working on the Star Wars stuff? I mean, is it challenging because there's sort of so much weight and expectation there? Were the editors or the people at Lucasfilm like, no, you can't do that. That contradicts something, you know?
You know, I think I got in at the perfect time, ended up working with the right people. Like John Rinsler was my editor on the Vader series, and he was really great. It was kind of very, very much felt like I could do whatever I wanted. And he just kind of guided things a little bit. And usually his feedback was more along like, how can we make this better? And it was never like, no, that doesn't fit. And with Jedi Academy 2, and I think with both of those books, when I was first working on them, we had no idea, we thought Vader and Son, you know, like they'll probably sell okay. Like it's Star Wars, people will like it. And Jedi Academy is like, well, it was only signed on to do one book, you know, like maybe if it does well enough, maybe they'll let us do, you know, another one. And both of those took off in a way that if I'd known that they were going to be that successful, I might have felt that pressure. But because I thought like, well, here's just this kind of fun fan fiction that I get to actually get paid for writing. So there wasn't a lot of pressure. And then I think, you know, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Like I saw Star Wars in the theater when I was 2.
How many times have you seen Star Wars in the theater?
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea.
Just guess.
Like, I mean, in the theater, dozens, but not in the theater, hundreds, thousands, probably. I mean,
thousands.
I mean, like when I was working on the Star Wars books, I would just would be my background. Like, so I'm one of those people where I either watch TV and film that I've seen before, like it can't be too new or it's too distracting, or listen to music. And so when I was looking at the Star Wars book, I would just basically like run all 6 films like on a loop. Right. You know, so every day I was watching like 3 or 4 Star Wars movies. And part of that is, you know, like that's kind of like gives me a lot of material, and like will make things click, and like think like especially with the Vader books where I'm using quotes from the films, it'll spark ideas. And then part of it is just, you know, like it's not distracting enough where it's gonna like I'm gonna not get any work done because I'm like, what's gonna happen in this film? But yeah, I mean, and so I think being like this huge fan, you know, I didn't have any doubts that like that I wasn't gonna do right by the material, I guess. Like, you know, and I think at the same time, I'm not such a blinded fan that I don't have opinions about, you know, changes to the special editions or, you know, and so I think I was able to walk this kind of line where, you know, it's people are on the same page, you know, like, for the most part.
Yeah. Did you, just out of curiosity, have you ever heard from like Lucas himself or anything?
Not firsthand.
Okay.
But when Darth Vader and Son had come out, I guess he requested extra copies.
Okay. Cool.
And they were saying like he pretty much never does that. So like I think like that, like if he asked for more copies to give out or whatever, then that would seem to me like a sign that. Yeah. But yeah, I haven't gotten a chance to meet him, so I don't know. We'll see. The Lucas Museum isn't coming to Chicago anymore, so that was I thought I'd be going to the opening gala and could hang out with him there, but I'll have to come here. I guess we'll see.
You're stuck here now, but you can drive.
Right.
So how long do your books take? Is there like an average, or are they all different?
They're all a little different, but in general, it's about a year process. And now normally I'm working on multiple projects at the same time. So right now I'm working on this adult project that I'm not going to talk about except to like tease you that there's this special thing that I'm working on. I'm working on the third Lucy and Andy, and then I'm working on a picture book actually.
Oh, cool.
And so a lot of it is like I'll work on one thing and then send it to the editor, or you know, like and I'll be waiting for feedback and I'll work on the other thing. So like for the Jedi Academy books, the first book took about a year. The third book took like closer to 9 months. And so by the third book, I knew the characters better. I knew like I didn't have to take as much time to draw them because I like drawn them so much. So that was faster. For the first two Jedi Academies, I did 2 rough drafts. By the third book, I kind of knew the story, knew where everything was going, and I only did 1 rough draft. Now, Lucy and Andy, the first Lucy and Andy took 2 years. Wow. And a good chunk of that was just the start, which was doing a lot of research. Actually, if you really want to break it down, that book took like 6 years, because the first Lucy and Andy was back in 2010, and I made up, this is a little sketchbook that I made up. It was actually a pitch for a cartoon. And the cartoon pitch didn't go anywhere, and it was same basics, like it's this brother and sister Neanderthal, and I wanted to mix in a lot of real life science, but the book is much different. But when the cartoon didn't go anywhere, this idea just kind of went back on the shelf. And then when I was wrapping up Jedi Academy and I knew I needed kind of a break from Star Wars, there's this idea I had that I never did anything with that would actually work really well as a book. Mm-hmm. So had to kind of reconfigure the characters, did a lot more research. So I basically for a year, I read nothing but science books about Neanderthals and watched Neanderthal documentaries and read every article that I could. And that book had 3 rough drafts. The first rough draft was pretty complete, where I actually did the gray tone shading. But there's something wasn't right about how I was trying to mix in like the science and the paleontologist characters. And so ended up doing 2 more rough drafts, like totally reconfiguring the stories. Like they're actually chopped out a lot of characters because it was kind of unwieldy. And yeah, so that one, just the process was so much more involved, figuring out how to make the kind of book that did what I wanted to, which was really fun, goofy story about two Neanderthal kids living 40,000 years ago, but also including all this factual information.
Yeah. Oh, do you color your books by hand or do you use a computer?
All by hand still. So I work, so the Vader books, which are full color, those I work on illustration board. So it's just kind of a heavier paper. And I use these Faber-Castell artist pens. So I use their brush pens to do the coloring. And then for the Lucy and Andy or Jedi Academy, it's I work on just Bristol board, just vellum, which is a rough surface, and I use their gray brush pens to do the gray shading.
What's your process for doing a book like this? I mean, do you write it all out ahead of time? Do you just start straight to thumbnail?
No, so I'll show you. So the first thing is, like, I have an idea, like these are the basic things I want to include in this third Lucy and Andy book, right? And then I kind of have to figure out what's the overall story arcs for the main characters, like what's Lucy's journey going to be, what's Andy's journey going to be, and I start working out an outline. So like these are the different chapters and things. I rework that outline by hand because I think writing out by hand like engages your brain a little more with the material, so that, you know, it'd be easy to just type it once and then maybe I just change one thing, but then I'm not thinking about it each step as closely. But I do finally type it out when I'm ready to send it to my editor, and then when I send it to her, then we'll go back and forth, and I'll do it like just in Word. But then once we've got it where she's happy with what I'm doing, then I'll rewrite it out again by hand. Then I'll do kind of like a page by page breakdown, and then from that page by page breakdown, I do the first draft is like just not quite stick figures, and in fact, like a lot of times there's like a little letter for each character, like L and A, just in case like my editor, when she's looking at it, she can't tell who's who from the stick figureness, just to try and get the material down as quick as possible. And sometimes there'll be like placeholder dialogue where it's just like, that's not a funny joke, but I just need to get past that point instead of just, you know, spending 2 days trying to think of just the right joke. Instead, just like put something down and then work on it, on figuring out what exactly will there later. From this draft, I'll do a full size sometimes with the gray tones, but maybe not, of taking my editor's notes on this kind of thumbnail version, and do full size page by page draft of the whole book, and then get notes on that. And then I use a light box on those pages with the Bristol so that I don't have to repencil and then ink. So that second rough draft is rough enough where like the basic composition is there, but you know, it's not so finished that there isn't any room for me to like make easy changes to. So
when you give your editors the rough drafts, are you like just literally scanning those pages? Yeah.
Yep. So I just scan and send as a PDF, and then what I'll actually do, and you can see again in the first Lucian, is I write all the note, like she'll type out the notes, and then I go back and write the notes by hand on all the pages, so that again, it's just like, I feel like it just engages you with things a little more closely so that you really think about what you're doing instead of just kind of having it be that simple, like take out X and put in Y. You really kind of think about the bigger context, and yeah, and so like so after that, with the final art too, then then they have the copy editors go through and the proofreaders go through for all the punctuation and spelling, and they also check things like, is this text readable, or did you mean to do this with this drawing here? And so I'll take those notes, and sometimes it means redrawing a whole page. Sometimes we'll realize that a page in the story just doesn't work as well as we thought we did still. But usually a lot of it's just, I go in and Photoshop and replace text. And then maybe redraw one panel, and I'll just Photoshop that.
You're going through a lot of drafts on that. It looks like 5-6 drafts for each page. Is that?
I mean, it depends. I mean, then sometimes too, then there's pages that you do the first draft and it doesn't really change by the end, because it's just like that's your basic slapstick joke, and there's not really much anywhere else you can go with it, and you don't need to. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, because with Clumsy it was so much the opposite, where I basically just drew straight in ink. I didn't really script things for most of the pages. I just started drawing and filled in panel. I kind of knew in my head they're all 1 or 2 page stories for the most part, so it was easy to just do in my head one at a time. But this is a lot different process, more involved.
Sure.
So would you say you draw any inspiration in any of your comics from your children?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I did make this transition from writing for more adult stuff to writing kid stuff is having kids. And then I do have one book called Kids Are Weird, which is basically all goofy stuff that my son Oscar said from when he was first learning how to talk and put sentences together, to where they started making sense. Then okay, now you're just talking like a normal person.
Yeah.
That's not as cute or funny anymore.
Oh, that's great. Do any of you guys in the audience? Do you guys have a question? Yeah.
What about the other characters in Lucy and Andy? You've been talking a lot about Lucy and Andy. How did you get Phil and Mr. Carroll?
Yeah, it's kind of just, again, it's thinking about my own life. So I don't have a sister, but I have two older brothers. So a lot of Lucy and Andy is that sibling dynamic of having a sibling, and then it's just thinking about other characters. So Phil is this kind of, he's the older teenager, and he's kind of maybe inspired partly by my oldest brother, who was older enough that when he became a teenager and I was still younger, there was this certain kind of way of where he loved me, but then he would give me a hard time, and then so I just tried to think of different characters that would kind of fill different roles to kind of all expand how Lucy and Andy work together. So at the end of Lucy and Andy, the humans all come in, and there's this whole new set of kids. And so the second Lucy and Andy book is kind of, after you've seen how Lucy and Andy are together, now you're seeing how they're making friends and how their relationship changes or stays the same when they have these new people that they kind of have to deal with. So
at the very end of the book, I didn't read mine, but I've read it all. It said, I kind of got the idea that the humans were going to try to take their cave, because it said, "Did you find a cave? Yes." Was it occupied? Of course it was.
Well, you'll just have to wait to read book 2.
Why did you pick cavemen for Lucy and Andy?
So, I grew up, we had the Flintstones, and we had Captain Caveman. We had all these, and there was Land of the Lost. There's all these old caveman ideas about cavemen. And I enjoyed them all, but I realized as I grew up, that's not really people didn't live with the dinosaurs and things. And I had this idea that, there's all this new interesting research. So like 2010 is when I first came up with this idea, is right when the scientist Svante Pabo, he decoded the Neanderthal genome, which is like their DNA. So like he kind of figured out like how we are actually related to Neanderthals genetically. And there's lots of other interesting discoveries. And so like it was that real science that kind of was inspiring to me. And actually I brought this. Can anyone guess what this is?
Oh,
What do you think it is?
the stone spoon.
This is, yeah, so close. This is a stone knife from France. Like the estimate was like 25,000 years ago. So it might actually not be Neanderthal. It might be just an old human stone. And like, if you look at it, when I do the signing, you guys can take a closer look too. But, you know, it's this thing, like, this doesn't look like a knife. And also how do they make this? And so like that question of like, just how do you make a stone tool was something I'd never thought about as a kid. You know, watching the Flintstones, like the practical issue of like, how do I make a tool out of stone was something that like I never thought about. And it's like, well, it's basically like they're, you know, hitting two rocks together and chipping a sharp flake off. So
The Flintstones, they have like a bird that acts as a can opener.
yeah, they have lots of things. They have lots of things in the Flintstones.
Sorry.
But yeah, I mean, like, so that was really what interested me. And the other side of it too was, you know, I'd always loved dinosaurs growing up. And in Chicago, we have the Field Museum, and I would take my Oscar to the Field Museum, and he was really into dinosaurs. And one of the things that happened was, so we watched every dinosaur documentary ever made. Like started with Walking with Dinosaurs, and then we watched that so many times, we had to find something else to watch. So we were watching, like, you know, Walking with Prehistoric Beasts, Walking, all the National Geographic and History Channel specials, and eventually we exhausted all the dinosaur material. And so I was like, well, okay, well, they've got like Ice Age mammals, and we kind of transitioned into like, okay, any prehistoric animal that no longer lives, and we ended up watching cavemen, and that was another thing that kind of got my wheels turning, like thinking about, you know, just how people lived 40,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Did that answer your question? Okay. Yeah. Also, I just want to remind you guys, if any of you are up on the internet, if you have questions, we would love to hear them. I'm surprised we don't have Parker and Jack, because they always ask lots of questions. Yes. Yes, you. Yes, you. Yes, you.
You obviously have a lot of commitment and responsibility to the material, and you're mentioning the 3 drops. And I was wondering what was possibly the pivot points that helped you get to the next sprint. Like, you know, there's always that, oh, I edit this, I add that. Can you recall? Like,
yeah, I mean, I don't remember exactly how it went, but the key was just realizing, you know, I had the idea of these paleontologist characters coming in, and the key was realizing, one, splitting the book up into chapters, which I didn't really do with Jedi Academy. Like there's kind of breaks between things in Jedi Academy, but there's no distinct chapters. And then moving the paleontologist to the end of the chapters, where it doesn't interrupt the flow of the story quite as much.
this is more of an editing choice.
So
as opposed to
yeah, and then
in regards to moving material around.
yeah, and then my editor on the series is Phoebe A. She's long time editor who has done a lot of nonfiction books for children, and so she's really helpful in terms of like how much is too much, and is this enough, or this is interesting, but is it do we really need it, or does it become distracting?
More?
Definitely in the first book, and now in the third book, like the second book, I think I had a good balance. The third book, I'm worried like I might not be adding enough now, but we'll see. We'll see what she says. Yeah.
We have a question here in the front.
Yeah, as you said about like the Flintstones and Captain Caveman, at the end of your book, you added like a lot of the caveman timeline and then like all the other caveman cartoons that were created.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah, I tried to kind of, I think one of the other interesting things to me is just how I thought about cavemen when I was a kid and how culturally, like everyone thinks about them. So, you know, you have the Clan of the Cave Bear was a novel and then became a movie that was based on a lot of the, like the author actually did a lot of research for that book. And now a lot of that research is been updated or and so there's another movie called Quest for Fire which the premise of Quest for Fire is this movie is like these cavemen, like fire is like this valuable resource, and if you're like, so they're always trying to keep their fire from going out because then they won't be able to make it. And then, you know, I'm doing the research for this book and realizing like we've had control of fire for millions and millions of years. Like that was never a problem for them, like making a fire. So just how we think about cavemen is, and you know, like it's still used as an insult, like you're a Neanderthal, or you see it like the Neanderthal of this person or that person. And then realizing, you know, Neanderthals were basically they had some physical differences, but they weren't all that different from humans at the time.
Right. Were there any things while you were writing the book that you went, oh wait, I just found out
that's
wrong.
actually happening, because like, so there's a bit in the Luciani, the first book, about the hunting strategy of running a herd of animals off a cliff, and then they all land, and then you don't have to, like, it's
right.
Then you can just butcher them. And there is a particular site that I write about in there that the new paper, the research that I talk about, that paper was released while I was working on the book. So my original draft was different, didn't include like the fact that they had actually, there's one particular site where there's a ton of animal bones at the bottom of a cliff, and the theory was that Neanderthals had herded them off the cliff, and this new paper showed that the terrain was too difficult to actually herd, and like they mammoths couldn't have actually gotten up to the top of that cliff to get herded off. So then I had to update it to include. So there's things that are coming all the time that so I basically have a Google alert for Neanderthal and just keep an eye out for
fascinating
things.
Tens and hundreds of thousands of years old, and we're still learning new things today. That's kind of amazing when you think about it. We got a question in the back.
The mammoth fight scene is so awesome. And then you've been showing us how you do your little outlines. It looks like a lot of work. Do you ever get bored or frustrated? Like, I just want to draw the mammoth fight scene. Just jump ahead.
No, I try to never jump ahead, just specifically for that reason, so that I just don't end up with all the most boring parts, because that would be like, then you end up with like, okay, I've drawn all the stuff that I'm really interested in drawing now. Like, I really don't even want to finish the book. So I always try to draw like start to finish. Yeah, I try to eat my vegetables when the vegetables are served, and eat the dessert when the dessert is served. With Vader and Son, it was a little different, where well, actually, it was different because like that was all fun to draw.
Yeah. That was kind of all.
So it's all Star Wars. Yeah, it's just sugar after sugar there. So.
It's an incredible process. That could almost be published by itself, what you showed us. And I
I actually find that fascinating, and maybe you should consider about
I mean,
doing something.
Yeah, well, yeah.
well, actually,
Sorry.
that's not
Go, sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to Bigfoot you. Go ahead.
But I was, okay, one was, did that process evolve out of your scientific precision, perhaps? And two, is that a process that you teach to your students?
Yeah, I mean, the process changes for each project to some extent too. So like there's doing the different drafts for Lucy and Annie is similar to the process that I came up with Jedi Academy, but that was an entirely new process with Jedi Academy. And even with my autobiographical books, I've gone back and forth where this book has just kind of a basic outline. Then this book is scripted panel by panel before I ever start drawing. And this book, I have I know what each page will be, but I don't plan it out until I'm actually sitting to draw the pages. And I just try to let each project kind of have its own thing. So it's more interesting to me to work on that way. So like now I'm on the third book of Lucy Annie. I kind of have how the process works. It's becoming, it's a little, yeah, I mean, it's like, do the research and kind of.
Like the start of the book where this is lined up.
Yep. And so for the sci-fi series that the middle grade sci-fi series that I'm going to do next, I'll kind of alter that process differently and figure out a different way to do things. And yeah, I mean, I think this book, the rule that I set up for myself was like, I really wanted it to be grounded in this research. And so a lot of the process was kind of figuring out like, how do I get the story I want, but still have it remain grounded. So it definitely comes from that.
So what on the space coming up, are you treating it like space films, or are you actually going and researching like what people would need to survive?
I want to do a mix. So I want to have it. And one of the things about Star Trek compared to Star Wars is Star Trek always has this history of there's a little bit of science to it, and occasionally like there's like some definite science, and maybe it's on the fringes of what's theoretically possible, and then sometimes it's just like just fun, goofy stuff. And I really like that idea, like where like I can have the characters in the space series explore like actual astrophysical phenomena, like quasars or black holes or whatever, and kind of put in bits of that information, but then also just have weird alien creatures and alien planets that and so yeah, for that book, I mean, I've always been interested in physics and astronomy and space and science fiction, so I feel like that's kind of a really good place to like where I won't need to do the same level of research because I'm not setting myself up with the same kind of rules, but when there is something that's interesting to me, I can put it in there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any of you guys have any more questions? No? All right. Well, then one of the things that I always like to ask people, particularly with the kids club, because a lot of the kids are artists themselves or may grow up to be comic book people in the future. What would be your piece of advice to a kid doing comics to do the best comics?
I mean, so I have like a 3 or 4 part advice that I would give to both kids and anyone who wants to draw comics, and you could actually apply it to any creative endeavor, I guess. First thing is read everything you can, like not just stuff you're interested in, but stuff that maybe someone else recommends to you and you think like that doesn't look like something I'm interested in, but read it. Something that looks good is great. Something that looks bad or that isn't well written can be just as informative. And learning, the more you read, the more you'll get a sense of, well, why is this book good, and why do I not feel strongly about this book? And beyond just what you're interested in or what your taste is, but like actually like figuring out like how am I going to make a better story. The second thing is when you do stuff, show it to people. Don't just, you know, just do this thing and like now that thing like isn't good enough. Like I'll do something better and then I'll show someone. Show people and don't worry about whether it's good or bad or how it turned out, because that's all part of the process. So like you can see with Lucy and Annie, I do 2-3 drafts, and the first draft, like maybe it's good enough, maybe it's not, but like you can always do better, no matter how much you have. So the only way you're going to get work and just keep doing stuff. I guess that's the most important thing. It's just if you want to make comics, if you want to get better at making comics, sit down and make comics. Just don't get discouraged. Don't get caught up in the end product or thinking about, I think maybe not kids so much, but a lot, like I have students and they get caught up in like, you know, like, well, how do I find a publisher for this? And it's like, you know, if it's good enough, you'll be able to find a publisher. But if you're so focused on finding a publisher, it's not going to be good enough because you're not paying attention to the process. And like that process of making something and paying attention and making something that you care about, that's the key element.
Yeah, those are good words. You got anything else, Ben?
I don't know. Overall, I just really, really like the book. And I mean, I really like all your books. They just all work and they're all perfect.
Thank you.
That wasn't a question. It was a statement. No, I do too. And I've been thinking that, you know, since back in the day. I mean, I thought that there, and I thought that here too. So, you know, if you guys get a chance on, I think the third rack along, second shelf from the bottom is all Jeffrey's books. And all the Star Wars books are over there with Star Wars stuff. But like, yeah, things like Clumsy and Unlikely, I actually really recommend that all the adults pick it up and take a look because it's great stuff. And for kids, you know, you already know the Star Wars stuff, but you also might really like, he's got books about cats. These are really, 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 really adorable books about cats and funny. And just great stuff. So I definitely want to thank you, Jeffrey, for coming out and talking to the kids. And we'll do a signing here in just a couple minutes. Next month's book is Newsprints. This is an advanced copy of it. Newsprints by Rue Zhu. What a great name, Rue Zhu. I love that name. And so that'll be next month's book. It will be available on February 19th. No, sorry. That's when the event is. The event is February 19th. So yeah, the 31st, the book's coming out. February 19th, we'll have another one of these where Rue will be with us via video, and I hope you can all join us. Once again, thank you, Jeffrey Brown. Thank you, everybody at home. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, audience. We'll talk soon.